Welcome to day 2 of our study of ancient Egypt. Yesterday we learned about the ancient Egyptians and their roles that they played in society. Today we're going to talk about what life was like in ancient Egypt, compare it to our life today, and think about how it is the same and how it is different. Learning target or your aim today. I can understand what was important to the people during the ancient Egyptian times. Your criteria for success. I can use pictures to find out information about life in ancient Egypt. I can raise questions about Egyptian life. I can explain why the Nile River was essential to the survival of the ancient Egyptians. We talked a little bit about that yesterday, but we'll talk more about it today. I can put myself in the place of an ancient Egyptian. I can compare ancient Egypt to other ancient civilizations that I have learned about. So today we're going to look at some pictures, and in class we would discuss each one of them, but obviously we can't do that. So I'm just going to pause at each one, and if you need more time looking at it, just pause this video. I want you to look at each picture and be able to tell me what is happening and what it tells you about how the ancient Egyptians lived. So this is the first one. We'll just pause for a little bit, look at it, and think to yourself, what does it tell you about how they lived? Think about what role these people would be playing from our Egyptian roles from yesterday. So this is the River Nile, and it was essential to the lives of the people that all the people you have been discussing so far. And this is a picture of where the Nile River is. So you can see that it runs all the way through Egypt and then also through a lot of other countries in Africa. But you can see it's the start of it is right here in Egypt, and then it goes all the way through the whole country. The people of ancient Egypt depended on the Nile to survive. As we said, the Nile runs through Egypt. Most people live along and around it today still. This was also the case in ancient times. This is because the land near the Nile is such a great place for crops to grow. And we discussed that yesterday, especially like when the Nile floods, all that rich soil full of nutrients will go on the riverbanks and stay and is great for crops. And the rest of Egypt is desert, so water is very important to the country, and that is why the Nile is so important. So as we talked about, the Nile would flood every year and leave behind rich black silt. Silt is a type of soil that fertilizes soil, and it was essential for growing crops and food for everyone. There was a system of canals that led from the Nile, and they were used to water the fields. This is called irrigation. Today we see big machines that are in fields that are spreading water on crops. That's another form of irrigation, but what they did is they actually dug canals out where they needed water in the fields and then would use the water from there to water the crops. The Egyptians grew wheat and barley, as well as fruits and vegetables like melons, figs, peas, garlic, lettuce, and cucumbers. Flax was grown for linen to make clothes, and the Nile was also important for fishing. This was done with boats and nets. We talked about this in the ancient Mayan civilization unit, that the more that civilizations can grow their own food or like raise their own food like animals, the more time they would have. The civilizations that had to do the hunting and gathering and going out and hunting for food or gathering plants, that took the majority of their time. Whereas if you could grow your own food or raise your own animals for food, it was much, much easier. There's no such thing as money in ancient Egypt, so people would trade by swapping things like pottery, food, jewelry, and art. The boats were used to travel up and down the Nile to trade throughout the country. We talked a little bit about that yesterday too. Mud from around the Nile was used to make bricks for buildings. And the papyrus plants around the river were used to make papyrus, which was paper of the ancient Egyptians, and that was what they would write on. All right, so that is our lesson today on how ancient Egyptians lived. You have an activity today. This is my friend Cleopatra. Imagine that you had a friend called Cleopatra too, who traveled all the way from ancient Egypt. How would you spend the day so that you could teach her about modern life? Think about what would you do, what will you eat, and where will you go?